episode 20. Today we're interviewing Deana Tanner, personal growth and development coaching for the queer and polyamorous communities. Good morning, Deana.
Hello.
I hope everyone's having a great day so far. Welcome to episode 20. We're Judy and Alan, and today we're going to talk to Deana Tanner about what she does. So Deana, I think that perhaps you and I overlap somewhat in what we do for a living. You're doing personal growth and development coaching, and I have worked as a behavioral health rehabilitation specialist. And we might have some of the same clients and some of the same goals and use some of the same tools. But I think we just might approach it a little differently. What do you think?
So I think that with your work, it sounds like it's kind of a little bit more of like one specific area at a time. Whereas the approach that I take is we kind of look at the big picture and we look at what foundational interpersonal skills we're missing largely from childhood. And they all kind of like run together. It's like having 5 different colors of yarn all balled up together. And we can't really necessarily just pull them apart completely and separate them, because your autonomy affects your boundaries and your boundaries affect your personal responsibility. So we just take them and like weave them together nicely in a braid.
Okay. Go ahead.
So Deana, what does a personal growth and development coach do? What kind of things would someone come to you for?
So a lot of the people that I work with, they come to me for this general sense of something's not right in my life. Something doesn't feel right. And with the conditioning and the way that we were raised and socialized and a lot of the skills that we're missing, our interpersonal relationships are hugely lacking in these skills that are necessary to make them healthier, to make them more stable, and to especially with communication, there's a huge gap in the difference between how we communicate and what healthy, effective communication looks like. And I just kind of sort through with people, like some clients have issues with boundaries, so they need assistance in figuring out what is a boundary. And then once they know what boundaries are good for them and what they need, how do we go about enforcing that? And how do we regulate? Because it feels scary. If you've never enforced a boundary before, to start enforcing boundaries can be really overwhelming and scary. And so every area that my clients bring to me as, you know, I'm having trouble, there's not really a blanket statement to what happens, because everybody's situation is different. Everybody's needs are different. And so I work with them to figure out what's underneath the surface layer and how to implement changes that make them feel better about their life and help them grow as people.
Okay. And how did you come to have such a thorough understanding of polyamory?
I have been polyamorous myself for over 10 years. Well, some form of non-monogamy for over 10 years. My husband and I, when we first met, we both recognized that there were reasons that monogamy didn't make sense, but we hadn't fully ventured into polyamory itself. We just started as a variation of evolved and then moved from there. And then the more we participated, the more research I did, the more people I met who were polyamorous. And then when we started building out our polycule, I became the go-to. So I got lots of insight into lots of different types of relationships and different ways that polyamory was playing out for the people that I knew.
Okay. So you live this every day. So people who come to you know that you get them.
Yes, this is my life.
Okay.
Oh, what do you think makes a successful, healthy poly relationship?
I think that there's a lot of areas. I think the ethics behind it is probably the biggest thing. If there's anything that's unethical about it, you're automatically setting yourself up for more hard knocks and some harder learning curves and steeper learning curves. So that definitely plays a role, but then also the interpersonal skills that I work with. If you good boundaries and effective communication and being able to understand your emotions. We all feel emotions all of the time, but most people can't identify their emotions. And for those that can, most of those people can only identify their surface emotions. So if somebody says, I'm angry, angry may be close, but it might not exactly be what they're feeling. It might be more frustration. It might be more irritation. It might be more. So if you're just irritated, angry is more severe. But if you're like raging, then anger does not accurately describe the severity of what you're feeling. So then you add in those, and then we grow up with this very skewed sense of personal responsibility. We take responsibility for other people's emotions and their actions when we shouldn't, but then we're also conversely taught to not take responsibility for what the things that we should be responsible for, the things that we say, the things that we do, the way we behave, we react and respond to things.
So you said a while ago, the ethical nature of non-monogamy. Can you define what you mean by ethical or unethical?
I think that the view of ethics is too subjective in some people's minds. What I look for most when I'm conversing like with a potential partner on what the ethics of their relationship is how upfront they are about things, how they behave, and like how they share the way they behave, the way they think, the way they operate, as far as there are some baseline things that just are not ethical. Like, we know that cheating is wrong. We know that, but if you're not having these deeper conversations to get like really specific about what your relationship looks like or what your agreements are, that may not necessarily be unethical, but it's going to cause problems. It's going to cause issues in the long run. So a lot of it boils down to how much of an understanding and how much depth people go into in these conversations. But I'm finding that most people don't realize how deep they need to go. There's a lot of assumptions being made. There's a lot taken for granted.
So people should be honest and transparent, basically.
Yes, but also learn what ways they need to do that so that there's not assumptions being made.
Right. There are always assumptions. Okay. So personally, I have a little bit of a problem with some of the labels and categories that are used in polyamory relationships structures. I don't really fit neatly into one of those structures, I don't feel. So I often just say, oh, I have 3 people that I'm involved with, and I just don't go into the structure. Is there a particular relationship structure that you feel is healthier?
I don't think that there's anything that's necessarily healthier as long as there's that honesty and that transparency and that introspection into, all the layers of it. Any kind of hunting, dragon hunting, unicorn hunting is inherently unethical because you're making decisions about other people. That's not to say that like triads can't form organically or ethically, but when you have 2 people going out looking for this one person who's going to fit neatly in this box, and they have to fit all of these requirements and they have to behave in XYZ manner, then you're taking away somebody's autonomy. You're taking away somebody's freedom. You're often finding situations where people are intentionally withholding information that people need to make informed decisions. So anything that's withholding information for people to be able to make an informed decision is not going to work out. But I tell people when it comes to like hierarchy, if you want to have hierarchy, as long as you are telling people exactly what it is that hierarchy looks to you and allowing them to make an informed decision, then you can do it in an ethical manner. But if you just say we have hierarchy and you either don't tell potential partners or you don't let them know what that involves, then you're straying into unethical territory.
So you wouldn't say that the hierarchy in and of itself is not healthy.
Correct. Because as long as everybody's on board and agreeing with it, then it can be okay.
Okay.
So you have something called the 5 pillars of polyamory. Can you explain what those are?
So I use those pillars to kind of describe that the work that I do, they apply to all interpersonal relationships, not just polyamory. But I chose to focus on the queer and polyamorous communities just because they're underrepresented in terms of like coaching services and therapy services. They have less available to them because polyamory informed and polyamory tolerant is not the same as openly accepting and warm and welcoming of polyamory. And I want to give people a space to have that, where there's not that hemming and hawing of, okay, they've accepted this much, but what if this next thing is too much? And now they're going to start judging me. And now it's going to affect the quality of my care or the working relationship. But those things, those pillars that I work with is autonomy, personal responsibility, boundaries, understanding emotions, and effective communication. They all kind of wind together in order to form the healthiest versions of interpersonal relationships.
Okay, so let's spend a little time on those. So autonomy. I heard you tell a story about coffee on Alicia's podcast. And so could you tell that story and kind of tell us how that applies to autonomy?
So growing up with the conditioning and the messaging and the socializing that I had this idea of how I was supposed to behave and how I was supposed to act as a wife. And it wasn't really suiting me to just constantly be giving and giving and giving in ways that were not authentic to me, that didn't feel good for me at the time. And I started feeling this resentment that I couldn't even identify as resentment at the time. It was just this big uneasy feeling that kept popping up over and over and over again. And with some introspection, I was able to get to a point where I realized that every time my husband asked me to make his coffee in the morning before he went to work, I would tense up. And I would get like this, oh, don't ask me. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And I realized that I was doing something because it was expected of me, not because I was genuinely doing it as an act of love. And so I really, like, it sounds so silly to hem and haw over making coffee, but I was so deeply conditioned to believe that if I said no to this, that I was going to lose my husband's love because I was going to upset him or hurt his feelings, or I mean, it was huge in my head, but I find that it's not just me. There's so many people who relate to that same feeling over things that are quote unquote trivial. And so
I can relate to that very story because that same with my first husband. He was in the military, and every morning I got up, made his coffee, made his breakfast, made him a sack lunch. He was in the military and he had to get up at 4 a.m. every morning, and he wanted to eat breakfast every morning before he went to PT, which is physical training. So at 4 a.m. every morning I was making breakfast. Even when I had a little baby, even when I would rather have stayed in bed, I was doing this. I did this for 10 years until we got out of the military. And I continued to do it pretty much until we got divorced. So I can relate to that. Yeah, there's so many things that we're conditioned that this is what a good wife does.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
And so I started diving into that, and I was like, I don't want to get up and I was with you. I had a newborn. I don't want to get up and make coffee this early in the morning. I don't want to do that anymore. And I was looking in the pantry, probably trying to make lunch for the kids. And I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm gonna say that I don't want to make coffee in the morning anymore. And so I had what I call a preface conversation, so that I'm not just like changing the game on him with no warning whatsoever. I let him know, hey, I realized I've been operating on conditioning and just doing what I thought was expected of me, but I really don't want to wake up and make coffee for you in the morning anymore. And I was like, I was scared shitless. I thought, okay, this is it. He's going to divorce me over this. And he was like a little bit disappointed because he's been so used to me doing this for him for so long. And he was like, okay, like, I'm a little bummed out. I get it. And I said, okay, you know what? If I'm already awake, you can ask me. I still might say no. But if I'm already awake, I give you permission to ask me anyway. And so the first morning I didn't make coffee, I laid there and I was nervous. I was like, he said he was fine, but what if he's not fine? And like, it was fine. And he left and I just cried. I was like, oh my God, I didn't make the coffee. I didn't make the coffee.
I know exactly how you feel. I mean, early on in my marriage, my wife and I discussed this in length, and she works hard, even though she works from home. She works in some ways way harder than I do. And I told her in the beginning, you get up when you need to get up. I can make my own dang breakfast. I am a full grown man. I can make my own breakfast. You sleep if you need to.
Yeah, it was just conditioning on both of our parts, because he was conditioned under the same terms, just on the other end of it. And I had been doing that from the beginning, so there was never a case for him to even question it. I'm pretty sure he thought I was doing that because I wanted to, because we never really discussed it. It was just what I was doing, and he had gotten used to me doing it. And so there we were.
Yeah. And we all have all that conditioning, and we don't even know that we've been conditioned.
Exactly.
Yeah. So,
Well,
okay.
The way I was raised by my grandparents, and I was taught that, like, I know a lot of like the older generations are like, the lady is supposed to be subservient to the husband and all that other stuff. My grandpa and my grandmother, actually, while she did not teach me that a woman is supposed to be subservient to the husband, she did tell me that a lady is supposed to be held on a pedestal. And I try to do that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I told my wife, I'll make my own breakfast. You work hard every day, you sleep. So
Yeah.
So how would you help someone develop personal autonomy?
It always starts with introspection. So as we were just talking about, with all of this conditioning, we don't even realize we have it. So one of the things that I listen for when I'm talking to a client is when they use the word should. And so if we're in conversation and they're sharing whatever is coming up for them, every time they say should, my question is, who says? Who told you that you should do this? Where did this idea come from? And so when we start examining the shoulds, we start to unwind where everything came from. And then we bring in the element of, well, what do you want? What is it? Put yourself in this situation with the idea that you get to choose whatever you want, and it's not going to have a negative outcome. If that's the case, what would you do? What would you choose for yourself that would make you happy, that would make you feel better, that would excite you, whatever it is? And then we start implementing them. We start working on each one by one, because some things, whether they're trivial in society's eyes or not, they can feel really, really big. And so what we want to do is we want to take the first manageable step towards that goal of autonomy, that like particular subsection of autonomy. And then we want to do the next best thing, and then the next best thing, and then the next best thing, until they're comfortable just going all out in that area with autonomy. And then we look at another area. What shoulds are coming up? What conditioning are we operating under? What do you really want? And then also I give them the tool of the preface conversation if it involves somebody else. If somebody else is going to be affected by these changes, we use that to kind of help with the emotional regulation piece of it.
But how do you help someone develop personal autonomy when they say they don't know what they want? And I say, you make 1,000 decisions every day. Do I want to wear the blue shirt or the green shirt today? Do I want to have a sandwich or a salad for lunch? You make thousands of decisions about what you want every day, but you can't tell me what you really want for your life. How do you help somebody have autonomy when they say they don't know what they want?
Well, it depends. So some of my clients are already more familiar with the idea of like tuning into their intuition or like feeling a yes or a no in their body. And if that's something that they're already familiar with, we run with that. And like, okay, so if I had a client who we were working on the autonomy part, and it's like, okay, if I say, do you want pizza or do you want tacos? Do you know which one you want if I give you those two choices? And the answer was yes, I want the tacos. Okay, so cool. You knew what you wanted in that moment. How did you know? What did that feel like? What came up in your mind? What came up in your body? What was that experience of knowing what you wanted for you? And then we figure out how we can transpose that onto other situations and how we can translate it to other ways in their life. If they're not as familiar with identifying in other situations what a yes looks like or what they want or what they need, then we start with ruling out what they don't want, what they don't need, what isn't good for them. And a lot of times we can work backwards and reverse engineer to figure out what they do want.
Well, I think that some people have never in their life been given permission to have what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So they do not know what it feels like to feel that. So when you ask them which one feels better, they don't know because that as far as they're concerned, they don't have permission to have what they want.
Right. And so that's where the very personalized nature of coaching comes from, because every time I have a conversation with somebody, I'm picking up on context clues. I'm picking up different elements of whether it's the wording that they choose or their body language or the way they either light up or, like kind of hunch down. And I mean, that falls under body language, but it's an energy thing too. You can see their energy change, whether it goes up or down. And so using all of those, like that's kind of like my superpower, is being able to take all of those things and piece it together. Like one of my clients said, like, I literally just took all of the dots that she gave me over months and months and months and connected them into this like mind-blowing light bulb moment. And so that's where the benefit of that one-on-one exchange and coaching comes from, is I can look for all of those things as I'm talking with a client. And even if I can't explain to you right here and right now what I saw, I know what I saw. I bring it up and they're like, oh, holy crap, you're right. Okay. And then we can start to make sense of what their experience is.
Okay.
Well, when a person hasn't been raised to know it's all right to set boundaries, how do you teach them this? They may be afraid to set boundaries because they might believe that if they do, their partner won't love them anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's extremely common. That's something that I deal with quite a bit, which makes sense because that's something that I struggled with quite a bit when I was going through this whole process myself. So what I always encourage my clients to do is start with a low-level, low-risk boundary, something that maybe they don't actually care what the outcome is. Maybe it won't actually affect anything, but practice it and try it on. So like, if there's 2 different pasta sauces and you're having dinner with somebody, and I mean, it's not exactly a boundary, but it's a good way to test it out, is to assert what sauce you actually want. Don't just go with what somebody else wants. And then when you see that the other person is like, yeah, okay, we can have the sauce that you want, it kind of starts building a confidence. And if you start with these things that maybe aren't necessarily even boundaries, but just kind of ways of asserting yourself a little bit and being honest about what you want in the moment, when it's so low risk, as you build the confidence, it gets easier to go, okay, you know what? I am no longer available for you to yell at me when you're frustrated. And that's one of the things that I see the most, is that people react to things, whether it's us directly or things around them, but they take it out on us. And being able to say, I'm no longer available for that, is a hard thing. But if you've been practicing saying what you want, what's important to you, what you need, whatever, up to that point, when you get into emotionally volatile situation, it's easier to go, okay, I've been saying what I want, I've been speaking up, now I can speak up when there's a little bit more on the line, and it's not as difficult.
Okay. So how about effective communication? We all know how to communicate, right? We do it every day. So we're all experts at that, right?
One would think. So when I say effective communication, we can talk to people all day long. We can use words and body language all day long, but it doesn't mean that you're conveying what you think you're conveying, and it doesn't mean the other person is hearing what you think they're hearing. And so this goes back to assumptions. We make assumptions about what people mean in their communication all day, every day. And then when you factor in things like ask culture and guess culture, okay, how did this person grow up? What is their context for being able to say this? We had this come up in my household the other day, where a situation was offered or made known to a household member, and they said, yes, I want to participate, but the option to participate had already been given and accepted by somebody else. And the person was like, do you want to go? And they said yes. And then the original person was like, okay. And one person took that as yes, and the other person took that as, I'm acknowledging what you're saying. And so then you have this miscommunication, but it's so common. People use okay in place of yes or no all the time. Like, right. Once you hear examples like that and you start looking and you're like, how does anybody talk to anybody at all? Because none of this makes any sense.
What I find funny is when people, like, when you do this like really long chat with somebody and the only response you get is the letter K.
That usually,
right? It's like, I'm writing a friggin' novel here and all you give me is one letter? What the hell?
Exactly.
That usually means I don't know what to say and I don't want to offend you, so I'm just going to say okay.
Right, exactly.
Well, it's like how we used to say in the South, when we say bless his heart, it usually means what an idiot.
Exactly. And so when I'm working with clients, we're working through all of these things that have been built up your entire life. Like, how direct are you being? If you, and so not as a means to like infantilize my clients, not at all, but it's something that I found extremely helpful when I was learning all of these things, is to relate it back to childhood, because essentially we are starting over with all of these interpersonal skills. When you start coaching with me, we start fresh from the very beginning with no assumptions about how anything works. And so if you tell a child something, you may know exactly what you mean, but if you're telling them something for the first time, they might not actually have any context for whatever the hell you're talking about. So they might make their best attempt to follow whatever it was you said, but then you're like, well, what the hell? Why did they just do that? And I'm like, well, I mean,
my grandparents used to do that to me as a kid, and I would just sit there and drool.
Yeah, like, okay, yes, you communicated something, you used words, but if there's no context, if there's no mutual understanding of what this means, so you have two people in a relationship and one person says, I want to communicate more, And the other person says, okay. And then then they end up in a fight a week later over not communicating more. Well, you said you wanted to communicate more, so I did. I added in an extra text message every day. That may not have been what they were looking for, but it still met the criteria of communicating more.
I mean, it's either that or like when you say you want to communicate more and they're like, okay. And then you communicate more and they're like, huh?
Yeah. I mean, even just in that example, there's 15 different ways that could go and still technically qualify as communicating more.
Right. Okay, so.
All right. So you call these the five basic pillars of polyamory. Are there others?
When you talk about like structure and stuff, there are so many more elements that you could add to it. But when you're talking about the interpersonal relationships, like I worked really hard to boil it down to be as simplistic as possible, because like I said, I'm teaching people basically from infancy how to human again with healthy understandings and a healthy way to operate. So I think this boils it down to like as easy as it can get as far as the personal growth and development aspect of it. But if you talk about polyamory in a wider scope, I'm sure there are so much more that just falls a little bit out of my purview for where I am in my coaching practice.
Okay, so what are the most common mistakes that you see people make when they get into non-monogamy?
They try and take monogamy and put it on multiple relationships instead of taking time. I believe that if I had my way, everybody would have a set period of very deliberate personal growth and development and education in order to reframe everything they know about how to be a good human in healthy interpersonal relationships and healthy interpersonal connections, and how to do it in a way that gets rid of all the monogamy undertones. Because it doesn't work if you try and just take a monogamous framework and place it on several different people. You're going to run into so many problems and so many issues. So there's a lot of deconditioning that needs to happen. And the non-monogamy community as a whole would benefit so greatly if people had a way to go about doing this before getting into extra relationships and additional relationships, and then running into all these problems that they don't know how to handle because they didn't go backwards and make sure that they were coming at it from the healthiest place possible.
It's like they say, you can't build a house on a shaky foundation.
Exactly.
Okay. I think it's your turn.
Actually, it's yours.
No, I just did that one.
What about embracing non-monogamy?
Yeah, I just did that. You can see we're so professional here.
Yeah, we're real professional. I mean, I practiced this for weeks.
Well, good. I feel like I fit right in there.
I looked in the mirror and I'm like, you can do this. And we start doing it. I'm like,
that's okay.
That's what editing's for, right? That's
right.
I try not to edit this. I try to edit as little as possible. So,
well, I mean, at least some people may get some laughs out of it, at least.
Hey, I always say I'm really funny, but I can never make it come out when I want it to. So maybe somebody will be like,
I'll look in the mirror and I'll say, you look like $1 million, all green and wrinkled.
Okay.
Do you have any questions for us, Deana?
I don't think so. Like I did my research and everything was so well laid out that.
Well, I always ask that at the end because I have had several people that I interviewed. They go, when I say, well, it's time to wrap up, they go, now can I ask you something? And so I always decide not just to put that in at the end.
Like, way to put me on the spot here.
No.
I don't know what you're talking
Looking
about.
around all shady. Is there a way out of here?
Okay, so
like I'm gonna slide out of here.
If people want to contact you about working with you, how could they contact you?
So the best place to get started is my website, practicalpolyamorycoaching.com. It's got the links to my TikTok and my Facebook group and my Facebook page, and it's got some blog posts and my currently published podcast interview, all of those things about, to get to know me and decide whether or not you want to come join my community where you can learn how to grow on purpose.
Okay, and if you'll give me those, I'll put those in the show notes so people can have those to click on.
Sure.
I'm thinking about starting up my own podcast again. It's been a while.
Oh, and what will that be about?
Just various topics.
Okay, well.
I know somebody who wants to interview on a podcast, so that can be.
Oh, okay, well, good. So
That's
when that
like his
happens,
bucket list.
we'll definitely let you know when that comes out. Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here. Visit the Center for Unhindered Living's blog at unhindered-living.com. Join our Facebook page at facebook.com/unhinderedliving. Have something to say about what we've talked about today? Leave a comment. Join the discussion. Thanks for listening and have a great day. Currently, this podcast can be listened to on Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Amazon Music, and Radio Public, as well as our YouTube channel. Thank you guys for being here and have a great day, everyone. See you next time.
Bye.